Hey everybody, my name is Emma Pniewski. I'm a content creator here at Plaid, and welcome back to another craft break. Today we are going to be making a really cute wedding sign. It's going to be totally DIY'd, and it's a really inexpensive way to add some customization and personalization to your own wedding decor, or maybe you know somebody in your life who's getting ready to celebrate their big special day. So today I'm going to be teaching you all some really fun and hopefully helpful tips on how to do some faux hand lettering and some really simple floral painting. So let's go ahead and get started. But before we do, one thing I want to point out is that today we're going to be utilizing a brand new FolkArt kit. It is called the Countryside Cottage kit. It is inspired by countryside decor, quaint little village towns, and I am so excited to share with you all the colors that come in this kit. So first off, it comes with 14 colors of FolkArt matte acrylic paint, and then it also comes with two really unique specialty paints from our FolkArt line. It comes with this beautiful pastel pink color shift, which just like the name states, it changes colors in the shifting light. So that is a really, really fun addition to this kit to add a pop of specialty paint and a little metallic pop to really finish off whatever you're wanting to craft at home. And then it also comes with a classic. It comes with our FolkArt Metallic Glam Gold. So you can add a little pop of gold to a really rustic, beautiful, floral inspired palette. So as you can see to the side of me here, we have some really beautiful whites and linen colors, some gorgeous pinks and earthy inspired greens, as well as this yellow ochre, this light blue, this dark rich brown color, and then some beautiful purple colors as well. So all together you can create dozens and dozens of gardens with this really beautiful kit. And that's exactly what we're going to be using to do our wedding sign today. So I also want to point out that this is the surface that we're going to be crafting on today. And like always, you can find all of these materials on plaidonline.com. One more thing before we get started, Stephen White is in the studio with us today. So if you have any questions or comments that you want to list in the chat below, then make sure to do so. Stephen can answer those questions or reply to your comments himself, or he can relay them over to me. So without further ado, let's go ahead and get started. So as you can see below me, I already went ahead and all I did was I used some masking tape or some painter's tape and blocked off that beautiful raw edge that this wood surface comes with. It has that live raw edge, which really adds just a beautiful rustic touch to our finished project. And all I did was I taped that off, and then on the inside I painted it with FolkArt matte parchment, which of course comes in our kit today. Okay, so the next things that you're going to want to have to follow along is some transfer paper. So I have this, you need one sheet, and the great thing about transfer paper, if you've never used it before, it is a really great and easy way to transfer over designs to a surface that you don't really feel comfortable freehanding, and it's a really great way to customize and personalize your crafted projects. So that's what we're going to do today, and you know, personalization and customization goes really hand in hand with DIY wedding projects. So it's great to have a piece of transfer paper, and then you're going to want to print out or hand draw whatever pattern or word or design that you want to go ahead and transfer over to your surface. So this is going to be a little directional sign that we're going to place in our wedding, and it just says ceremony, and we're going to do some really beautiful florals at the top here and then a little arrow pointing for where your guests should go. So we have our pattern, our transfer paper, our surface that we already went ahead and painted with parchment. Next, we're going to want to have a variety of flat brushes, palette paper, water basin, and some paper towels. So let's get started by initially transferring our pattern over to our surface. So this is an optional step, but whenever I'm transferring something, I like to cut my pattern down to size. You don't have to, but when I do it, I find that it's a little bit easier to work with. and there's not a bunch of extra space that is getting in the way. So I'm just going to cut this down. It doesn't have to be perfect. Mine is not going to be. Just trim it up till we're only left with the pattern that we're wanting to transfer. Okay, so we have our ceremony there. And I'm going to give you all a quick little demo on how to use transfer paper if you've never used it before. So something else I should have mentioned, you also want to have some type of writing utensil or stylus with a fine tip, because what we're going to do is we're going to trace over our pattern, and after we do, our design is going to be transferred over to our surface. So I like to use a pencil, and only because once I mark my design, I can see which areas I've already gone over, as opposed to using a stylus, which of course wouldn't leave a mark. So I like to use a pencil, but you could also use a pen, whatever you have at home. Okay, so once we've done that, you just want to make sure that your design is small enough to where, however big your transfer paper is, that it's going to be totally encompassed by the transfer paper. So if your transfer paper is a little bit skinnier and you don't have enough room, then you can always, like for example, this is folded up, so this is the full sheet, but you could always cut off a little space here and tack that on. If maybe your word is a little bit longer, you can piece together your desired size of transfer paper just by cutting it down. So I'm just gonna, like we did with our design, I'm just gonna trim up our transfer paper so that it is also a workable size. Just like so. And now what we want to do is we want to make sure that our transfer paper is lying in the correct position. And what I mean by that is that your transfer paper is going to have two sides, and sometimes at the bottom corner it'll say something like this side up, or it'll have an arrow directing you on how to place your transfer paper. But if it doesn't and you're unsure, then here's what I always like to do. You want to take a scrap piece of paper. In this case, I just have some paper towels, and that's going to work great for us. You want to place it down and then just make a little tiny notch mark. And you can see it's teeny tiny, but you can see that that did transfer over. So now we know that the darker side of our transfer paper, the shinier side, is going to go face down, and the more matte, chalky side is going to face up. So what I want to do today is I want to leave some room at the top for a little floral design. So I'm going to make it a little bit more than halfway down, still leaving room for when I want to place our arrow. And on top of that, we are going to place ceremony. So I'm going to move this like that so that I can work with it a little easier. So what you want to do is you want to make sure that your design stays in place. If you want to, I encourage you to use some masking tape or even some scotch tape, some clear tape, whatever tape you have, just to hold your two pieces of paper in place so that they're not wiggling around, and you know exactly where your pattern is going to transfer to. So we're going to go ahead and follow the lines on the bottom first, moving along, and then we'll come up to the top. And another thing, when I first started using transfer paper, I was a little bit worried about this. So if you're new to using transfer paper, this is something that's good to note. Your hands, placing a lot of pressure with your hands is not going to make those marks. If you're putting a lot of weight on the paper, really the only thing that's going to make a mark with your transfer paper is a fine tip. So if you used like something like your fingernail to hold it in place, then that might transfer it over. But just my smooth hands applying a lot of weight to it is not going to transfer any pattern over. So that's not something we need to worry about, luckily. So I'm just going at the top of our word here. We're almost finished up. Going around our E. Okay, and we're back to where we started. So one thing that we don't want to forget to do is transfer over the little loops inside of our E and our R. So just make sure, go through our O here and make sure that all of those loops are transferred over as well. So now when we remove our transfer paper and our pattern, you will see, dun, 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 we have our word transferred over. It's as simple as that. We forgot the little loop in our Y, but that's okay. We'll just freehand that one. Okay, so super easy, super simple. It's a great way to personalize whatever you want to transfer onto a surface. Okay, so we have ceremony there. Now let's pick a color that we would like to hand letter with. I think for today I'm going to go with Thicket, which is this really beautiful, rich, dark, kind of hunter green color that you can find in our Countryside Cottage kit. So I'm going to apply a little bit of our Thicket to our palette today. And here's another tip for you guys at home. Whenever you're trying to create some really fluid, fine lines in your painting, I always like to dampen my brush a little bit. That way, you know, FolkArt paint is so rich and creamy. So when we actually add a touch of water to our paint, the paint is going to want to glide just a little bit easier when we are trying to do something like hand lettering, like we are today. So all I have is a water basin with just some regular tap water. I'm going to dip my number 2 flat, so whatever thin flat brush you want to use. You could also use a liner brush or a round brush. It's whatever you feel comfortable using. I just prefer to use a really small flat brush. I feel like I have the most control with that. So we're adding more and more water to our paint until it is a workable consistency. Keep dropping my paint in my water basin, but that's okay. Okay, and so that should do it. And I'll move this in so you guys can see a little bit more, but you'll see that now that we've added a touch of water, the paint just glides so smoothly onto our surface, which is exactly what we're looking for. So now we're going to go ahead and fill in our ceremony. So, you know, transfer paper is a really, really excellent resource to take advantage of if maybe you don't feel the most confident with your hand lettering skills, if you're not a calligrapher, which I feel like is a little bit difficult for most people, especially if you don't have a lot of practice. So this is a really, really great resource to use so that you can make whatever kind of hand lettered patterns your heart desires. It's kind of like a coloring book. We're just filling in the lines. Another reason I love to use a small flat brush opposed to a liner brush or a thin round brush is because you guys can kind of see in our word today, but there are some wider spaces in some of the letters, and so when we use that flat brush, I feel like it's a little bit easier to fill in some of those larger spaces. And feel free to, as you can see me doing today, add a touch more water to your paint just to water it down a little bit if you feel like some of that water is starting to evaporate off of your palette. How are we doing in the comment section, Stephen? Any questions?
No questions. We've got some people tuning in saying hey on Facebook and YouTube.
Hello, everybody. Thanks for tuning in today.
I was going to say that I think a lot of people see the stencil paper as kind of intimidating at first, but once you really like learn how the process is,
Right.
it just kind of becomes second nature after a while.
Absolutely. I know for sure I was intimidated when I started using it, but the more and more, just like anything, the more and more you use it, the more practice you get, the more comfortable you start to feel with using a new art supply or a new type of paint or a new type of brush. So totally, I agree with you, Stephen. It's just like anything. It's a little intimidating at first, but the more practice you have with it, the simpler it becomes to you. And we are almost done. Quick and easy. Going to fill in some of those spaces where I just outlined it at first. We're going to fill those in so that you really start to see the word in its full. And if you feel so inclined, once you're done, you can go back over some areas, touch it up a little bit if you feel like you want to, maybe even apply a second coat, because we did water our FolkArt paint down a little bit. It's not going to be as traditionally opaque as we find our FolkArt paint to be regularly. So because we watered it down, if you feel like you need to go ahead or you just want to go ahead and add a second coat, then totally feel free to do that once your paint dries a little bit. And you'll also find that because we added that water, it's going to dry more quickly than it would if we didn't add any water.
Emma, did you mention where you got that pattern to trace with? Did you just find it online, or did you?
You know what? That's a great question. You can just find it online. If you have some downloaded fonts in a, printing software like Word or whatever, Google Sheets or something like that, if you find a good font that you like, you can download it, and then really that's when the fun starts. You can create so many different and unique patterns. But yeah, you can absolutely, use Google, whatever kind of thing you have for image searching to find a pattern like this one that we're using today. And very inexpensive. Okay, beautiful. So what I'm going to do now is rinse my brush. And I'm going to take my pencil, and right underneath our hand-lettered ceremony, I'm just going to sketch out a little arrow. So I'm going to make one line going that way, an arrow, and if you are really feeling confident, then by all means you can go ahead and just paint this right away. But today I am just going to sketch it out first with a pencil. I normally like to do that just because it is so much easier to erase pencil lines than having to paint over something. Okay. So let's switch it up and go for another beautiful color from our palette. I'm going to take our coffee bean, which is that really rich dark brown color. And just like before, we watered down our thicket a little bit to really make it easy and glidable. We're going to water down our coffee bean just a touch as well. And I am still using that number 2 flat brush, just whatever thin flat brush or liner brush or round brush that you feel comfortable using. Okay, sometimes even if your hands sometimes get a little bit unsteady, sometimes mine do, I like to kind of anchor my wrist in place or anchor my elbow to the table, and that helps me make some really, really clean straight lines. Do that again so that our line is really, really opaque. Just like that. Okay, so there's our little directional sign. I'm actually going to go ahead and turn our line arrow into a full arrow shape, fill that in. Super, super cute. So I'm going to rinse my brush. And let's paint a really simple, loose floral design on the very top, just to add a little bit of fun to our sign. So we already used our thicket. Two other really beautiful colors that we have in this kit are FolkArt Matte Clover, which I'm going to add to my palette, which is like a medium green color. And then the lightest green color that you'll find in this kit is Mossy Meadow. And one thing I love about all three of these green colors is that they're really home decor inspired. They're kind of more sagey, jadey greens as opposed to a more bold primary yellow and blue mix. They're really soft and subtle, which I love. So taking my liner brush again, I'm going to pick up some of that Mossy Meadow, and I'm just going to create some really loose leaf shapes, really big and loose. Maybe we'll have some lines coming down, kind of being some stems coming off of our little simple floral design. All using that Mossy Meadow. I'm going to fill in those leaf shapes. Okay, so our Mossy Meadow is our lightest green tone in our kit that we're using today. We're using that Countryside Cottage kit, which you can find on plaidonline.com. That's our lightest green. So I'm going to rinse my brush just a tad, dry it off well, and then I'm going to go ahead and introduce some of our clover, just kind of accenting those soft green leaves. So at the bottom here, swooping up. Just a really loose, simple design. And let's even have some leaves coming off of our vine that we drew, or painted rather. Make some little leaves coming off that vine. And to make these tiny leaves, all I'm doing is I'm touching down, applying quite a bit of pressure, and as I come up to meet my vine, I'm lightening down on that pressure. So I'll show you guys that again. I'm applying quite a bit of pressure, and then as I come up, I'm lightening up that pressure, And that way, when we apply a lot of pressure onto our brush, we're going to get wider lines. And if we apply a softer amount of pressure, then you'll find that you will get some thinner lines. So kind of cool little thing to remember as you're painting. Coming up, maybe I'll start as I come up on my vine, I will start to make my leaves a little bit shorter. Same goes for this side. One more right here, it's missing. Okay, I'm going to go ahead and rinse my brush again. And now I'm going to go for that thicket. And on our bigger leaves, I'm just going to add a little bit of detail with that darker thicket. Maybe even kind of rounding out the ends of these tinier leaves that we just did. Just creating some interest in our pattern, the darker tone. Something like that. Okay, so now I'm going to take from our same palette that we're using some yellow ochre. Did I get too ahead of myself? I may have. I'm actually going to go back for some of that thicket. And I'm going to create a couple more vines. So at this point, I just like to kind of step back from my painting and see where I want my next floral element to go. Just like that, and I'm gonna take actually my number 6 flat, dip it in my yellow ochre, and I'm gonna create little buds coming off of that thicket vine. Just making little circles. So now, really quick, I'm going to introduce back to my palette some parchment, which if you'll remember is the same color that we used for this really soft linen-y base coat. Oopsie. I'm going to take my smallest flat brush that we're working with, which I believe, yep, is the number 2. And while my yellow ochre is still a little bit damp, I'm going to take some of that parchment, water it down just a teeny tiny bit, and I'm going to add a little bit of highlight. Almost like these are berries in our bouquet. And I want my floral pattern to be a little bit whimsical, so I'm not focusing on one consistent light source for the highlights. They're just kind of coming from everywhere. Okay. And last, to finish it off, I'm going to introduce all 3 of our beautiful rosy colors in this kit. We have Festive Fuchsia, which is, I can't wait for you guys to see this. It's a really, really gorgeous color. Some Hot Pink. And lastly, Vintage Tea Rose. Now I'm going to go for my 1/2 inch flat brush, and I'm going to go for my middle tone, which is our Hot Pink. Now I'm going to create one big circle here. And then a few smaller circles. One right here. And one right here. So you guys, I hope by the end of this today you feel inspired, because this painting is really, really simple to do. You don't have to be a super talented artist. You just have to have an idea and a surface and this kit to get started. It's a really, really easy one today. Okay, I'm going to go for my number 6 flat brush. I'm going to go into my Festive Fuchsia, and I'm going to make some really loose little C strokes around our flower, kind of coming in the middle as well. I'm going to go ahead and do that to all of our hot pink circles. Okay, and then lastly, I'm going to get some of that vintage tea rose and add some lighter colors. Too much paint on my brush. Into our circle. Okay, so now let's go back into our parchment. Create a little dollop in the middle to kind of represent our middle of our flower. And if you actually want to hold your brush perpendicularly to your surface and do a little spouncing or pouncing motion while you're holding your brush perpendicular, then you'll kind of get a more irregular center for your flower. Okay, just to round it out, let's go ahead real quick. Last thing, we're going to introduce the purple colors from our kit today. So we have Violet Pansy. We have purple, which is going to be the deepest color in our purples that we're using, and finally Lilac Ice, which is this really beautiful lavender color. Okay, so I don't like this open space that we worked on in the beginning, so let's go ahead and do some beautiful layering. So I'm going to overlap some of that empty space, just kind of creating a starburst pattern with our Lilac Ice. Almost like it's growing off of these vines. Okay, so I'm going to take some of that yellow ochre, same thing we did before. We're going to hold our brush perpendicularly to our surface, bounce, bounce, bounce into the center of all of those sweet little lilac flowers that we just painted, into the center of those. And because our lilac is a really light color, it's almost kind of wanting to blend into the background of that beautiful off-white parchment. So I'm gonna pick up some violet pansy and just kind of add some little touches of purple into some of these flowers, so it really starts to come off the page. Okay, you guys, so that is our directional wedding sign for today. So if you wanted to go ahead and maybe add some more groupings of florals down here and down here, then you feel welcome to do that if you want to add a little bit more color to your sign. But I hope you had fun painting along with us today. This is going to live on whatever platform you're watching it on forever, so if you don't have the supplies with you right now, if you don't have your Countryside Cottage kit, then you can find that on plaidonline.com. You can pick it up and then re-watch this so that you can follow and paint along. I hope you learned some great tips and tricks on transferring and creating some really, really simple, easy floral patterns. Thank you guys so much for tuning in. Don't forget to follow us here so that you will always know when we're going live, so that you can stay tuned for some great project ideas and inspiration. Thank you guys for watching, and until next time, we'll see you again. Bye.